Poverty is always the result of socialism. Poverty does not arise from a country's lack of natural resources, for instance. Numerous cases illustrate the truth of what I am saying. Many countries are very poor in natural resources, like Switzerland. It has practically none. It has no mining resources, for example, only some snowy mountains and some grassland. Nevertheless, it is an extremely wealthy country. Why? Well, in Switzerland, the process of social cooperation takes place within an institutional environment in which private property, entrepreneurship, and the market economy are respected. And it would be impossible to imagine a poorer territory with more acute population problems than, say, Hong Kong. Yet its economy is very prosperous because it rests on the principles of private property and the market economy. In contrast, since socialism viewed as any system of institutional aggression against the free exercise of entrepreneurship blocks the innate creative capacity of human beings, it ruins our chances of devoting our ingenuity to trying to improve our lives and get ahead. So, think of any of the current or recent demagogues, people like Hugo Chavez. All nationalism, protectionism, expropriation of the assets of foreign capitalists, dividing up of wealth, taking from the rich to give to the poor, imposing progressive taxes on income and profits, going after those who have the most, all of these impoverish countries and bring them down. In fact, there are clear examples. It is very difficult to make historical comparisons, but some are more valid than others. For instance, there are countries which, due to certain circumstances, have split in two for prolonged periods, and one part has been socialist and the other capitalist, though both have started from the same capital base, cultural history, and so on. One case in point is East Germany and the Federal Republic of Germany. Up to the fall of the Berlin Wall, there was an enormous difference in income, quality of life, etc., in favor of the capitalist system over the socialist one. There are other examples. Before the market economy spread throughout large areas of mainland China, an obvious difference existed between nationalist China in Taiwan, which was prosperous and one of the Asian miracles, and communist China under Mao Zedong, which was very poor. We could also consider certain African countries separated by a border drawn simply with a pen and ruler, such as Kenya and Ethiopia. Ethiopia has been desperately poor. Relatively speaking, Kenya is richer. Why? Well, Ethiopia has been weighed down by Marxist, military, interventionist systems, under which entrepreneurs have been harassed, extremely heavy taxes have been imposed, a welfare state has been maintained, wheat has been given away for free in Addis Ababa, farmers have been ruined, and so on. This is significant because intuition leads us in one direction, and economic analysis leads us in another. It opens our eyes, and we become aware of the great burden of demagogy inherent in many prescriptions for supposedly encouraging economic development. Lord Bower was a development economist and professor of economics at the London School of Economics, and he realized that the concept of the Third World could be defined only by focusing on the sole common denominator of all developing countries. According to Lord Bower, a developing country is a country that receives development aid. That is the defining characteristic of a developing country. Bower's article is called Foreign Aid and its Hydra-Headed Rationalization. Believe it or not, when development aid is given, when aid is given to combat poverty, poverty is generated. For example, food stamps are provided to single mothers and low-income families in the United States. You cannot even imagine the effect of such programs. Single mothers come out of the woodwork. There is an incentive to be a single mother. Oddly enough, as sad and hard as it is to say, if out of pity you give money every day to someone with no arms who waits for you in a certain place, on a particular corner, at a specific traffic light, in some neighborhood in Madrid, then you are sure to see that person every day, precisely because you are providing him or her with a source of income. If you give money to a destitute person, you can be certain the person will remain destitute. There are other very powerful examples, like UN aid distributed in refugee camps in the Congo to those who fled Rwanda. I spoke with some nuns who told me that many thousands of people spent months and months, even years, in those refugee camps until the problem in Rwanda was resolved and they were told they could return to their farms. Do you know what their reaction was? They said, "Go back to our farms?" In other words, go back to work on our farms from 6 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, milking cows and growing crops? No, no, we want to go on as we have these last 3 years, with people bringing us powdered milk and shoes and everything we need. So you see, there is aid that kills. And if you have a child and you give him everything he asks for, you will be making a huge mistake, because you will destroy him. The way to truly help people is not to give them fish, but to give them rods and teach them to fish. That is, in an institutional environment in which private property is respected, creative entrepreneurship is fostered, and all people can take ownership of the fruits of their entrepreneurial creativity and freely exchange them with others. This is what is needed. The quick way to help others escape underdevelopment is to foster the redesign of institutions. Why is Africa poor? It is poor because it is immersed in endless civil and tribal warfare. And there is no respect for private property, nor any guarantee that one day you will be able to enjoy what you manage to grow, accumulate, and invest. Anyone who wishes to foster economic development must promote an environment of respect for private property and support for entrepreneurship, not just aid. Aid is food for today and hunger for tomorrow, quite literally. Well, the article describes in depth the pitfalls of aid and the great lie in the area of international aid. Listen, there are a number of civil servants. The article examines this closely. I will not dwell on it. These international civil servants live in idyllic circumstances in developing countries. They have magnificent homes, Mercedes-Benzes, and many domestic workers. They are international civil servants devoted professionally to the field of aid. They have an interest in the continuance of the aid mechanism, which makes countries dependent, for if it ceases to operate, aid professionals lose their high social status in the countries in question. They propose grandiose projects removed from reality, when what must be fostered in poor countries is the spontaneous micro-entrepreneurship that arises in a market economy. And that is not to mention the typical scenario in which the aid that arrives in needy countries goes to the local mafias, the local governments, and they monopolize it, immediately channel it into the black market, sell it at astronomical prices, and pocket the difference. Do not think I have dreamed all of this up. It is what actually takes place. The entire farce of international aid, the 0.7% of GDP Western countries decide to devote to aid to somehow ease their guilty conscience for having harmed third world countries through the common agricultural policy by, for instance, as we discussed the other day, flooding international markets with needlessly produced agricultural products. Then, by paying 0.7% in aid, we somehow hope for a redistribution of income from rich to poor countries. What all of this does is doom those countries to poverty, just as we doom a destitute person to poverty if we give him or her money. We remove people's incentives to fight, to get ahead in life, and to make creative attempts to boost their own entrepreneurship. So, aid kills. Aid given to combat poverty generates poverty, and the policy of third world aid is a policy of hunger. Only private initiative, which is very close to the needy, can tell us how far we can go in giving, what causes dependence and what does not. When emergency situations arise due to earthquakes and the like, of course people bend over backwards to help, and those near the scene arrive much sooner than large bureaucratic organizations like UNICEF, the UN, and so on. By the time these get there, an entire network of private associations are already taking care of the problem. Things have worked this way for decades and centuries. Or do you think there were no earthquakes 100 or so years ago? There were earthquakes, and yet people recovered from them with no problem. For example, an earthquake hit San Francisco in 1906. The government did not have to intervene at all. Rent prices skyrocketed, and the problem was immediately solved. Many people living in homes that had not been destroyed did some calculations and said, well, I have 2 extra rooms. I will rent them out. Well, I am going to set up a little tent business. And spontaneously, without any organization, the housing problem which arose following the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fires was solved.